The ocean gives back what it takes. But when nets came up breathing, when a fisherman saw another ocean below his boat, when crabs started spelling words on deck, they learned the Pacific keeps receipts. And it never forgets a debt. Welcome to Verified Fears. Tonight, 10 fishermen who discovered the ocean had been watching them the entire time. 10 nights where the water stopped pretending. 10 accounts from men who sold their boats the morning after and never explained why. If you've ever felt something wrong in deep water, if you've sensed the ocean was aware of you in ways it shouldn't be, you're exactly where you need to be. We need your support to keep bringing you these accounts from the edge of the Pacific, so hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Drop a comment with the story number that hits hardest. And if you make it through all 10 without pausing, you've got nerves colder than water at 800 fathoms. Your support keeps this channel alive. Now kill your lights, listen close, and remember, the ocean's always listening back. You've been pulling nets for 17 years, and you know what belongs in them. Fish, seaweed, sometimes debris from other boats, rope, buoys, the occasional piece of equipment someone lost overboard. You know the weight of a full haul by the strain on the winch, by the sound the cables make when they're pulling something substantial up from 400 feet down. You've done this so many times you could do it blind, in your sleep, in any weather the Pacific wants to throw at you. But tonight, off the coast of Astoria, Oregon, something's wrong with the weight. The winch is straining like you've got a full load, but when the nets break the surface, they're empty. Completely empty. No fish, no kelp, nothing. Just the nets themselves. Dripping seawater back into the black ocean, heavy as hell, but holding nothing you can see. You check the strain gauge. It's reading 500 pounds. You look at your deckhand, and he's staring at the empty nets with the same confusion you're feeling. You've heard of ghost weight before, equipment malfunction, sensors going haywire. But this is different. When you reach out and touch the net, you can feel the weight in it, sagging in the middle like something's there. But there's nothing. You shake it off. Equipment acts strange sometimes. You reset and drop the nets again, moving to a different spot, somewhere the salmon have been running thick all week. Your family's fished these waters for 3 generations. You know where the fish are. This is supposed to be easy money. The second haul comes up the same way, heavy on the winch, empty when it surfaces. But this time, your deckhand notices something. He points at the net, and you see it too. The mesh is moving. Not from the wind, not from the weight of water. It's pulsing, contracting and expanding in a slow, steady rhythm, like it's breathing. You tell yourself it's the current, the way the water's moving through the mesh. But you've never seen current do that. It's too regular, too deliberate. One breath in, one breath out. Your deckhand reaches for it with the gaff hook, and you're about to tell him not to touch it. But he's already pulling a section closer to get a better look. That's when you both see them. Translucent sacs, each about the size of a basketball, connected by fibrous tissue that looks like veins. They're inside the net, clinging to the mesh, and they're breathing. All of them together in perfect unison. In and out. In and out. Your deckhand cuts one open before you can stop him. The smell hits you first. Ammonia mixed with something floral and rotting, something that shouldn't exist together. The sack splits and clear fluid spills onto the deck, and inside it, moving slowly in the deck lights, is a hand. Not a whole hand, just fingers and part of a palm, pale and small, curling and uncurling like it's reaching for something. Your deckhand drops the gaff and backs away. You're staring at this thing on your deck, this impossible thing, and you're trying to make sense of it. Some kind of jellyfish you've never seen? Some deep water creature that got caught in the net by accident? But jellyfish don't have hands. Nothing in the ocean has hands that look like that. Too human, too formed, fingers with tiny nails that catch the light. You look back at the net and realize it's full of these sacs. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all connected by that tissue, all breathing together. The mass of them fills the entire net, and you understand now why it felt so heavy. This isn't a few random organisms caught by chance. This is one thing, one massive, living thing that your net dragged up from the deep. And it's still breathing, faster now, more desperately, like it knows it's been pulled from where it belongs. You can hear it, not just see it, but hear it. A wet, rhythmic sound like lungs filling and emptying over and over. Your deckhand is saying something about cutting the net loose, about getting this thing off the boat. But you're listening to the breathing and you're hearing something else underneath it. Something that sounds almost like words. It's counting. You're sure of it now. The exhalations aren't random. They're forming a pattern. 1 breath, pause. 2 breaths, pause. 1, 2, 1, 2. Over and over, and now you can hear it coming from multiple sacs at once, overlapping, creating this horrible chorus of counting that's getting louder as the thing breathes faster. Your deckhand hears it too. He's grabbed a knife and he's cutting the net, sawing through the mesh to dump this thing back into the water where it came from. You should help him. But you can't move. You're watching the sacs pulse and listening to them count. And you're starting to realize that the tissue connecting them isn't just tissue. It's reaching. The fibrous strands are stretching out from the mass, extending toward the deck, toward your boots, thin filaments that move with intention. Your deckhand screams, and you snap out of it. One of the strands has reached him, wrapped around his wrist while he was cutting. He's pulling at it, but it's strong, fibrous, and wet, and clinging to his skin. You grab the knife from him and cut the strand. It recoils back into the mass, and the breathing gets even faster, even more frantic. The counting is loud now, dozens of voices exhaling in that pattern, 1, 2, 1, 2. And you and your deckhand are both cutting, hacking at the net, trying to get this thing away from your boat. The strands keep reaching, keep trying to grab purchase on anything they can find. One wraps around a cleat and you have to cut it free. Another snags on a bucket and drags it toward the mass before you can kick it loose. Finally, you cut through enough of the net that the whole thing slides back into the water. You watch it sink, this massive breathing mass of sacs and tissue, still pulsing, still counting, disappearing back into the black water beneath your boat. The sound fades as it goes deeper. 1, 2, 1, 2. Until there's nothing but the normal sounds of the ocean and your engine and your own breathing, fast and panicked in your chest. Your deckhand's wrist has marks where the strand grabbed him, red welts that look almost like a burn. He's not saying anything. Neither are you. You've both just seen something that doesn't exist, something that shouldn't be possible, and you don't have words for it yet. You cut the rest of the net loose, thousands of dollars of equipment just dumped into the ocean, but you don't care. You're not pulling that thing back up. You're not touching it again. You fire up the engine and head back to port. 3 hours earlier than you planned, your hull completely empty. Your deckhand sits in the wheelhouse and doesn't talk. You don't talk either. You just steer and try not to think about what you saw, about that hand inside the sack, about the counting. When you get back to the docks before dawn, you tie up and go home without unloading anything because there's nothing to unload. You don't sleep. You lie in bed and listen to your own breathing, and you keep hearing that pattern. 1, 2, 1, 2. You sell the boat within a month. You tell everyone it's because of equipment failure, because you're getting too old for the work, because you want to spend more time with your family. You don't tell anyone about the nets that came up breathing, about the sacks full of forming hands, about the counting. Your deckhand quit the day after. Last you heard, he moved to Idaho, as far from the ocean as he could get. You stayed in Astoria, but you don't go near the docks anymore. You can't stand the smell of the sea. At night, sometimes, you wake up counting in your sleep. Your wife mentioned it once. Asked you why you were whispering numbers in the dark. You told her you didn't know what she was talking about, but you did. You were counting. 1, 2, 1, 2. The same pattern you heard that night, burned into your brain like a rhythm you can't shake. You've started wondering what would have happened if you'd kept fishing, if you'd pulled more nets from that area. How many more of those things are down there? Breathing in the deep, counting in the dark, waiting for someone to drag them up to the surface where they can reach out with those fibrous strands and pull something back. You think about that hand, those tiny fingers, and you wonder what it was counting. What any of them were counting. Days, breaths, people. You'll never know, and that's probably for the best. Some things the ocean keeps to itself. Some things should stay in the deep where they belong, breathing and counting where no one can hear them. But now you've heard them, and you can't unhear it. That rhythm is yours now, part of your breathing, part of your sleep. 1, 2. 1, 2. Forever. You ever had the feeling that something far above you is staring straight down, just at you, and you're the only one who notices? That's the part nobody tells you about working nights on the Pacific. Not the cold, not the hours, not the danger. You get used to all that. It's that sense, somewhere between hauling gear and checking the radar, that the sky isn't empty, that it's occupied. I didn't really believe that feeling meant anything until the night I watched a star refuse to move. 7 hours off Cape Flattery in winter seas, with the whole world sliding and heaving around me. Except for that one point of light, pinned in place directly over my boat like a nail through an insect. By the time the sun even thought about coming up, I understood that whatever I'd been feeling all those years out there wasn't paranoia. It was a tension. It started like any other midwinter trip. Long-lining for cod north of the Washington coast, alone on a boat I knew better than my own house. Wind cutting sideways, 12-foot swells rolling in steady from the west. Air cold enough that the metal rails tasted like ice if your lips brushed them. You'd hate it your first night. After a few years, the misery becomes routine. I had my line set. Lights cutting a narrow tunnel through black water, the boat shouldering through it like always. Above me, the sky was that brutal clear you only get when the air has been scrubbed clean by days of storms. Stars everywhere, sharp enough to hurt your eyes if you stared too long. I was working the rail, hauling in section after section of gear, checking hooks, bleeding fish, resetting rhythm. That's when I noticed it. Not a flash. Not some dramatic sign. Just a star that refused to behave. When the boat rolls, the sky usually rolls with it, you know. The mast swings, the horizon pitches, and the stars slide across your field of vision in smooth arcs. But this one point of light didn't slide. It held the exact same place just above the bow rail, no matter how much the boat rose or fell. I watched it between hauls, just long enough to catch the pattern. Everything else shifted. That one didn't. At first I told myself it was a planet, some trick of perspective, maybe a reflection on the wheelhouse glass. I wiped the glass. It stayed, I moved to the opposite side of the deck. Still there, same spot over the bow. You know how your brain does that thing where it quietly moves something into the ignore folder because you don't have time to process it? That's what I tried to do. Hooks needed clearing, fish needed sorting, gear needed tending. But every time I glanced up to check the weather, that light was waiting for me, perfectly steady. An hour passed. Wind picked up. Swells got steeper. The boat's motion grew nastier, more unpredictable. Didn't matter. That star might as well have been nailed to the top of my mast. After 2 hours, it wasn't interesting anymore. It was wrong. The feeling that came with looking at it shifted from curiosity to a kind of pressure, like a thumb pressing between your eyes from the inside. You've probably stared at the night sky long enough at some point to feel small. This wasn't that. This wasn't, I am tiny in a big universe, small. This was, I am under a microscope, small. It hit me all at once. This awareness that the line between me and that light wasn't one way. That if I could see it, it could see me. My shoulders tightened, and I caught myself hunching over my work like I could make my body a smaller target. Ridiculous, right? You tell yourself that. I told myself that. And yet, every time I looked back up, that light seemed just a little bit brighter. Not twinkling, not flickering, just slowly turning up, like a dimmer switch being nudged one notch at a time. Around the 3rd hour, the instrument started to get weird. First, it was the compass. The card didn't spin dramatically. It just got lazy. Tried to settle on a heading and kept drifting a few degrees either way, like it couldn't make up its mind. Magnetic anomaly, I muttered to nobody, which is the kind of thing you say when you're alone and starting to get nervous. Then the depth sounder began showing the bottom rising and falling in ways that didn't match the charts. Like the seafloor was breathing under me. One moment I was in 300 fathoms, then 180, then back down again, all while the boat speed stayed constant. The radar showed clear. No traffic, no weather, nothing. Just me and an empty ocean. And that fixed point of light, brighter now. Too bright. At some point, I realized I'd stopped doing my job. Hooks hung limp over the rail, fish lay half-attended in the scuppers, and I was just standing there on the deck, neck craned, staring straight up like an idiot. My eyes watered from the wind and the cold, but I couldn't stop looking. The rest of the sky had shifted subtly, as it always does. Constellations rotated. That one light did not. It sat there, dead center above the bow, and the longer I watched it, the more I felt this tightening in my chest, a rising panic for no good reason. It wasn't moving toward me. It wasn't doing anything dramatic. It was just there, watching. You ever hold eye contact with someone a beat too long and feel that strange, electric discomfort? Multiply that by 1,000 and aim it upward. That's what it felt like. I tried breaking the spell, forced myself back into the wheelhouse, closed the door, stared at the instruments. Even then, I could feel it above me, pressing down through the roof, through the layers of steel and wiring and insulation, like it knew exactly where I was inside my own boat. The cabin felt smaller. The air felt thinner. My ears rang with a silence that didn't belong at sea. No sense of distance in the wind, no shape to the waves. Just a flat, smothering hush beyond the glass. That's when the shadows started. You know how deck lights throw hard, simple shadows? One light, one clear outline. As the star got brighter, it started casting its own light across the boat. I didn't notice at first, because everything outside was already washed in my sodium deck lamps. But little by little, a second set of shadows crept in. Things that shouldn't have two shadows suddenly did. My own shape on the deck, thrown long and sharp by the overhead lamps, had a second, fainter twin stretching another direction, pointing toward the bow. Gear that hung at one angle had an extra silhouette at a different angle, like two suns were shining. Only I knew there wasn't two. There was just my deck lights, and that thing above me. When I killed the deck lights to test it, the world didn't go dark. That was the moment my stomach dropped. The ocean, the rail, the rigging. Everything remained etched in a ghostly, high-contrast light that made real night look fake by comparison. No color, just stark blacks and whites. And the shadows that light created were wrong. They were too long, stretching across the deck at angles that didn't line up with anything I could see. Some bent around corners where shadows shouldn't bend. Some belonged to nothing, standing shapes with no source. Tall, thin outlines, like figures caught mid-stride. I couldn't see anything actually standing there, just the absence their bodies would have created if they were. I backed into the wheelhouse and shut the door without remembering crossing the deck. My hands shook when I reached for the throttle. The sensible part of my brain screamed one simple instruction. Leave. Turn around. Push the throttle down. Run for shore. But the instruments disagreed with me. GPS said I'd barely moved in hours. Logs showed speed, but the track was a near-perfect dot, like I'd been circling in place without covering any distance. That didn't make sense. I could feel the swell, see the drift relative to the horizon. But as far as the electronics were concerned, I hadn't gone anywhere. I was being held in place. When I finally forced myself to look up through the front windows, the star, if you still want to call it that, had moved. It was no longer barely above the bow. It sat directly overhead now, dead center, so bright it painted a ring of light around the boat's wake. The rest of the sky looked distant. That light felt close, near enough that some stupid part of me thought, if I reached up, I could touch it. My throat went dry. My chest hurt. And out on the deck, those second shadows shifted all at once, turning as a group to face the wheelhouse. Nothing there but silhouettes, but every instinct in my body told me I was surrounded. Here's the part that sticks with me most. Nothing ever lunged. Nothing screamed. There was no tentacle on the rail, no monstrous head rising from the waves. Just that steady, unblinking light and the sense of being cataloged, measured, examined. Like something was taking its time, weighing me the way I would weigh a fish with my hand. Not cruel, not kind, just assessing. I made a decision then that you'll either understand completely or think was cowardice. I reached up, grabbed the brim of my hat, and pulled it down over my eyes. I turned off every non-essential system I could reach without looking up, left the boat idling, and slid down onto the wheelhouse floor with my back against the console like a kid hiding from thunder. I sat there for hours. Didn't check the time. Didn't move, except to flex fingers that kept trying to cramp from gripping my knees too hard. The whole boat hummed and creaked around me, and through it all, I could feel that light pressing at the roof above my head, like a hand testing the strength of the hull. At some point, without any fanfare, the pressure let up. I didn't feel it go. I felt its absence. The air came back. The background noises of the ocean separated from each other again. The distant roar of swell, the slap of water against the hull, the thin cry of some bird that had no business being that far offshore in the middle of the night. When I finally pushed myself up and dared to look out, the sky had reset. Stars where they should be. Nothing pinned in place. The extra shadows were gone. Just one set now, cast by my own lights when I flicked them back on with a hand that wouldn't quite stop shaking. I turned the bow toward shore and didn't set another line. Didn't radio anyone. Didn't sleep the next day or the day after that. Within a week, I'd listed the boat for sale. People asked why. I gave them all the standard answers: age, fatigue, wanting more time ashore. They nodded, understanding in the way only other fishermen do when you say you're done. Nobody asked what really tipped the balance. You're the first person I've told this to all the way through. Here's the part that really matters. The part that makes this more than some weird story about a bad night under a strange sky. It hasn't stopped. Not completely. I moved inland, far from the coast, far from salt air and the sound of gulls. Some nights, though, I still wake up with my heart pounding and that same tight pressure between my eyes. I'll lie there in the dark, stare at the ceiling, and every instinct in me whispers, "Don't look out the window." Whatever was up there that night, it noticed me. And every now and then, on the clearest, coldest nights, it feels like it remembers. Let me ask you something before I start. If you heard your own voice calling for help over the radio, word for word, would you answer it? Or kill the power and pretend you never heard it? You think you know what you do. I did too. I'd been fishing long enough to know my own voice, to know my own habits on the water, down to the way I said my boat's name on Channel 16. That's why the first Mayday didn't scare me. It just confused me. The fear came later, when I realized the position that voice was giving, my voice, was a place I hadn't reached yet. A set of coordinates sitting 3 hours ahead of me, waiting like a marked grave. It was a rough April night off the coast of Vancouver Island, that shoulder season where the weather can go either way without warning. I was running a small gill netter out of Ucluelet, working a late set for spring salmon. Nothing heroic, just trying to squeeze a little more out of a trip that had been mostly disappointment. The sea had that sloppy feel. Wind against swell, short chop over long waves, just annoying enough to keep you bracing every step. I had the radio on low, the way you do, half listening to the usual traffic. Boats checking in with each other, weather updates from the Coast Guard, the occasional bored chatter between skippers who'd been awake too long. I remember what song was playing on the little speaker I'd wired to my phone. It cut off mid-chorus when the radio overrode the input, and Channel 16 kicked in with that sharp, urgent tone every fisherman knows. Mayday. You can hear panic through static. It has a particular rhythm. But that call wasn't panicked, not at first. It was clipped, efficient, familiar. Mayday, 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 this is... And then the name of my boat. My boat. Spoken in my own cadence, with the exact same emphasis I'd used 100 times before on routine position calls. I stood there a few seconds, too long, just listening, because my brain refused to put the pieces together. There's a strange feeling that comes when you hear your own voice played back unexpectedly. You know that sensation? People talk about how weird they sound on recordings. Now imagine that. But the recording is you screaming that your boat is taking on water and you are going down. The voice rattled off coordinates, clear and precise, and every hair on my arms rose because I knew exactly where that position was. A spot I had punched into the plotter as my next set. I checked the GPS, I was still 3 hours away from it. Other boats jumped in immediately. That's what you do. Someone's in trouble, you respond. A couple of skippers confirmed they were altering course toward the position. The Coast Guard came on, calm and practiced, asking for repetition of details. The call repeated. Same words, same tone, same rising edge of fear near the end when the voice said, "We are taking on water," I repeat. Taking on water, I don't know what's pulling us down. And then the rest dissolved into static, and what sounded disturbingly like gurgling, like the radio itself was underwater. I grabbed the mic. That's instinct. You hear your boat's name, your own voice, and you answer. "Vessel making Mayday call, say again," I started, just the standard stuff. But when I keyed the mic, what came through the speaker wasn't my words. It was the Mayday again. Same phrasing, same delivery, same ragged breath at the end. It didn't matter what I tried to say. Every time I pressed the button, the radio broadcast the distress call like it was stuck on a loop. I let go and the channel went quiet, except for other captains talking over each other, confused, asking if anyone could raise the distressed vessel. You might think I'm making this up, or that I somehow recorded myself earlier without knowing. I went through all those explanations in my own head, desperately. Some weird glitch, some crossed frequency, something normal wearing a mask of horror. But none of that answered the real problem. The coordinates. That call said I was sinking in water I hadn't reached yet. And the longer I stood there, frozen, the closer I was getting to that point on the chart. I decided to turn away. Simple as that. If fate had drawn a circle on the map in red and written, "You die here," then I just wouldn't go there. I spun the wheel 10 degrees to starboard, then 20, then a full 45. Enough that the change in motion made me stumble. The boat came around. The compass agreed. But when I glanced at the GPS, my new course line bent back toward the same damn coordinates, like someone had grabbed the end of the track and anchored it. Plotter glitch, I told myself. I killed the autopilot and steered manually, eyes flicking between horizon and screen. Water passed under the bow. Swell hit at a different angle. Everything about the boat's motion said I'd changed course. The numbers on the chart plotter said otherwise. The distance to that Mayday position kept dropping. I tried another tactic, cut the engine and drift. Let the current take me somewhere, anywhere else. When the engine noise died, the boat settled into a different kind of movement. That slow, honest roll you only get when you're not fighting the sea. In the sudden quiet, Channel 16 came alive again. My voice, but not mine, more strained now. "Mayday, this is..." Boat's name again. Location repeated. "I've killed power, but I'm still being pulled. It's below us. It's..." Static. A wet tearing sound. Silence. I don't scare easy on the water. You can't. Not if you want to keep doing it. But I was scared then. Not the storm might flip me kind of fear. This was different. This was the feeling that time itself had folded into some ugly little knot, and I was standing in the middle of it, listening to my own future death play out on a tape loop I couldn't stop. The other boats were still racing toward those coordinates. I tried again to transmit, to tell them it wasn't real, or that it was real in some way I didn't understand, that whatever they were chasing might not be something they could help with. Every transmission from me came out as that drowning voice. They started calling me by the boat's name, asking for status, asking what was pulling me down. Each time I keyed the mic to answer, they got the same replay of that first Mayday. I could hear the confusion edging toward panic in their voices. One of them, an old-timer whose voice I recognized instantly, swore quietly on an open channel, the way a man swears when he sees something that breaks a private, unspoken rule. "That's his ghost talking," he said. "Gotta be." Another voice told him to shut it. The Coast Guard tried to reassert control. Coordinates repeated, timestamps logged. And through it all, I watched that distance reading shrink. 6 miles, 4, 2. I slammed the engine back into gear and did something I still can't fully justify. I pushed the throttles forward and aimed straight for the point the calls were coming from. If I was going to die somewhere, I wasn't going to drift helplessly into it. The water changed under me as I approached. It always does when you move across different temps and currents. But this was sharper, like crossing a line. The surface went from restless to weirdly smooth, like oil had flattened the chop. The bow cut through it almost silently. No spray, no slap. Just a gentle, horrible gliding sensation that set my teeth on edge. At half a mile out, the radio died. Not a fade, a cut. 1 second, chatter and static. The next, nothing. Pure, flat silence. No hiss, no atmospheric noise. I tapped the volume knob, checked the breaker, flipped channels. All dead. The world outside felt the same way. Muted. I stepped out onto the deck, and every footfall sounded like it was being absorbed instead of echoed. The water around the boat was blacker than it had any right to be, even for that hour. I couldn't see my own running lights reflecting off it. It was like looking into an absence. Then I heard my own voice again, not from the radio this time, from off the port side. "Mayday. Mayday." Same tone, same ragged breathing, same broken edge I'd heard through the speaker, only now it had that wet, close quality of a voice coming up through water. I walked to the rail because of course I did. You would have too. When someone who sounds exactly like you is begging for help in your own words, you don't stand in the wheelhouse and pretend you don't hear it. I looked over the side and saw lights below. Not bioluminescence, not another boat. These were running lights, the exact configuration I knew by heart. White masthead forward, red and green at the bow, all glowing faintly in a depth where they had no business being. My boat's lights, down there, tilted at a sickening angle, dimming slowly as they sank deeper. For a second, my brain did something impossible, trying to map what I saw onto the reality of the deck under my boots, the wheelhouse behind me. 2 identical boats, one above, one below, sharing the same space badly. The water near the surface bulged, and something passed between me and those sinking lights. Not a shape I can describe cleanly, just a darker mass inside the dark, big enough to blot out the glow for a moment as it moved. When it rolled, I glimpsed patches that looked like colonies of barnacles or anemones, except each one flared briefly with its own tiny, desperate light. Dozens of them. Hundreds. Little drowned beacons, flickering and going out. The mass moved with a kind of terrible slowness, like it had all the time in the world and knew it. My voice came again, right under my feet now. "I don't know what's pulling us down." I heard the gulp of a man swallowing seawater, choked on air he couldn't quite reach. "I don't know what it is. God, it's full of..." The sentence never finished. It didn't need to. I could see what it was full of. Those dying lights, trapped inside whatever that thing was. Sunk vessels. Lost flares. Signals that never reached the surface. My hand found the knife on my belt without conscious thought. Every survival instinct I had screamed at me to cut something, cut the engine, cut the idea that this was my future. Cut the cord between me and whatever version of myself was drowning down there. I staggered back to the wheelhouse, slammed the throttle down, and pointed the bow anywhere but there. The water fought me for a few seconds, like I'd been sitting in some invisible bowl and now had to climb over the lip. Then, all at once, the resistance vanished. The boat surged forward. The surface broke into normal chop again. Behind me, the slick patch of black water shrank. The radio crackled to life as if someone had flipped a switch. Voices layered over each other, swearing, calling my boat's name, reporting they'd reached the coordinates and found nothing. No wreckage, no debris, no oil sheen, just clear water and confused men. The Coast Guard logged it as unidentified radio interference and moved on. I didn't offer my version. How do you explain to people that you arrived at your own distress call and saw your boat sinking beneath you without a scratch on your hull? I finished that trip on autopilot in my body, not the boat. Tied up. Offloaded what little I had. Went home and stared at the ceiling for 3 nights straight. Within a month, my boat was sold. People asked why. I told the usual half-truths, tired of the grind, wanting steadier work, needing more time ashore. They nodded. Fishermen always understand when someone says, "I've had enough." What I don't tell them, what I'm telling you now, is that sometimes, in the middle of the night when the house is quiet, I'll hear a faint hiss from the old VHF I still keep on a shelf in the garage. It's not plugged in. The antenna's been gone for years. But I'll swear, hand to heart, that every once in a while, a voice leaks out of it. My voice, whispering coordinates I've never fished, giving a mayday from a place I've never been. And I lie there, holding my breath, listening to myself drown somewhere I haven't reached yet. And I wonder how many versions of me are down there in that thing, still calling for help that will never come. You ever have a tradition you follow so tightly that you don't even remember why it started, only that things go bad when you skip it? That's how it was with me and the first crab of the season. Before I knew how to read a tide chart, I knew this. When that first pot comes over the rail, you don't sell that crab. You don't cook it. You thank the water for it, and you put it back. No shortcuts, no substitutions. My grandfather did it. My father did it. I did it because they did, and for 15 years, the ocean and I had an understanding. Then one November night off Crescent City, I learned something I wish I never had to know. The ocean had been keeping score the whole time. We were 5 hours into the first run of the Dungeness season. That frantic opening window when every crabber on the coast stacks as many pots as the law allows and runs until they can't keep their eyes open. You can smell it at the dock, diesel, bait, cold iron, and that hard edge of competition under every friendly nod. Out past the breakwater, the harbor lights fall away, and it's just you, the gear, and miles of black water pushing against the hull. I had 70 pots in the string, each one baited to perfection the way my old man taught me. Each one sitting in water we'd been crabbing for 3 generations. The first pot of the season came up heavy, rope thrumming under my hands, hydraulics whining with that satisfying strain that tells you your year might not be a disaster. When the frame broke the surface, it was full. Beautiful, angry Dungeness, clacking and scrambling over each other in a solid, living mass. My deckhand whooped. I didn't. I did what I always do. I reached in, grabbed the biggest, meanest crab in the pile, and lifted it up in both hands. You could feel the weight of it. That solid, stubborn life fighting against your fingers. I held it over the rail and said the same quiet words I always say. Words that were probably just nonsense my grandfather made up. But they felt right. A small thanks for a big risk. Then I let it go. The crab vanished into the dark. The rest of the pot dumped onto the sorting table, and we got to work. Measure, toss the shorts back, separate the females, stack the keepers into totes. Routine, comfortable. The deck smelled like bait and diesel, and the faint, metallic tang of seawater that never leaves your clothes. We moved down the line, hauling pot after pot. And for a while, it was just work. Good work. Full pots. One of those nights where the fatigue doesn't bite as hard because the numbers are on your side. It didn't turn strange until the third string. We'd shifted a little deeper, trying to stay ahead of the crowd. When we popped that next pot, I knew something was off before it cleared the surface. It felt wrong on the line. Heavy, but not heavy in the way a pot full of crabs should be. Sluggish, dragging. When it came up into the wash of the deck lights, I froze. The pot was full, but every crab inside was arranged, not piled, not scrambling. Neatly placed, all facing the same direction, claws tucked just so, bodies forming a spiral pattern that wound inward to the center of the pot. They weren't moving, no clacking, no legs scrabbling at the wire. Just a still, perfect spiral of shell. You spend enough time on the water, you learn to recognize what could happen by chance and what couldn't if you waited 10,000 years. That pattern was not random. I felt the back of my neck go tight. My deckhand cursed softly and reached for one with the gauge. When he picked it up, it didn't react. Just hung there, limp. "Dead," he said, and I almost answered yes. Then the legs twitched, slow, delayed, like the signal had a long way to travel. We dumped the pot. The crabs spilled onto the deck in a heavy, wet rush. You could hear them landing, but the sound was wrong. Thuds instead of that sharp rattle of shell on steel. One flipped over, and that's when I understood what my hands had felt lifting them. The shell wasn't hard. It gave under my thumb like thick rubber. No crab should feel like that. No crab should move like that. The legs flexed, but not in quick, precise motions. They waved as if testing the idea of movement for the first time. I told myself it was disease. Some parasite, something gone bad in the water. I've seen sick crabs. This wasn't that. My deckhand took his knife and split one open at the apron, expecting clean white meat and brine. It peeled apart with a soft tearing sound, and there was no meat inside. Just black water, thick like ink, and tangled lengths of what looked like rope and little hard nodules that clicked against the steel when they spilled out. One of those nodules rolled to my boot. I bent and picked it up. It was a button. Brass, greened with age, stamped with the insignia of a company that doesn't exist anymore. Old. The kind of thing you'd find on a uniform from a picture in a harbor office. The yellowed kind nobody dusts. There were more of them mixed in with the mess on the deck. Bits of leather straps, corroded metal, glass beads. It looked like someone had emptied a lost and found onto my boat and packed it into crabs. We kept hauling. What else were we supposed to do? Leave 70 pots on the bottom because things were weird? The next pot came up. My stomach dropped when I saw it. Same spiral. Same careful arrangement. Only this time, the crabs weren't alone. Wedged between bodies and wired into the mesh were objects that had no business being in the ocean at all. A compact mirror with its glass spider-webbed but intact. A waterlogged photograph in a plastic sleeve. A watch with hands frozen at some long-forgotten time. The photo was the kind you'd find in a wallet. Two people smiling in front of a pickup truck that could have rolled off a lot in the 70s. Their faces were blurred, not from water damage, but in a way that made my eyes slide away, like my brain didn't want to register them. Object after object came up with each pot. A child's shoe with the laces tied together. A ring fused to a crab's shell, band disappearing under the carapace as if it had grown there. Identification cards from decades past, edges softened by time, names and faces belonging to people who'd probably been declared lost at sea or had simply stopped coming home. One pot held a tarnished ship's bell, the name of a vessel half erased by corrosion. I knew that name. Everybody in Crescent City did. It was one of the boats that never made it back after a storm in the 50s. My grandfather had been on the search crew. I could feel the night closing in on us, even though the air stayed still and the sea stayed almost unnaturally calm. No wind shuddering through the rigging, no gulls, just the quiet slap of water against the hull and the steady clank of the hauler as we brought up pot after pot full of returns. That's what it felt like. Not a catch, a return. I told my deckhand to start cutting gear. He stared at me like I'd gone crazy. Those pots cost money. The season is short. You don't just start slicing through lines because you're spooked. I should have argued, should have explained, but I didn't have words yet. I just knew I wanted whatever was happening to stop. Right then, right there, I pulled my own knife and cut the first rope. The pot slid off the roller and vanished, taking its spiral of crabs and trinkets back into the dark. It didn't feel like I was throwing away gear. It felt like I was returning something that had never been mine. We worked our way backward down the string, cutting as we went. The last pot we hauled before I turned the boat toward home was different. Heavier. It came up slow, net humming under the strain. When it broke the surface, my deckhand swore and dropped the hook rope like it had burned him. I almost did the same. Inside that steel cage, arranged with the same careful precision as the crabs before them, were bodies. Not skeletons. Not fresh either. Something in between, held together in a way that made no sense. Their skin was waxy, bleached of color, but not eaten away. Hair clung in drifting strands. Clothing hung in tatters, but still recognizable as old fishing gear. Oilskins, wool, boots laced up over ankles that had no business being intact. Their eyes were closed, every one of them, as if they'd just laid down for a nap. Crabs crawled over and around them, tucking themselves into hollows, balancing on ribs, slipping in and out of open mouths with slow, deliberate care. I recognized one face. That's what snapped something in me. It was a face I knew only from a black and white photograph that sat on my grandmother's mantel for 30 years. A young man with my family's nose and my father's eyes. My grandfather's brother. Lost when his boat went down in a winter storm none of them liked to talk about. There he was, lying in my pot on my deck, preserved in some obscene mercy. As if the ocean had tucked him away in a drawer and pulled him back out on a whim. I don't remember making the decision. One moment I was staring at that impossible display. The next, I was cutting. Rope, lines, anything connecting that pot to my boat. I cut it all. It slid, tipped, and splashed back into the water with barely a sound, like the ocean had been waiting to take it back. The surface closed over it without a ripple. We went in on empties. No catch, no explanation. I told anyone who asked that we'd had gear trouble, that something in the currents had twisted our lines, made the whole string unsafe. People accepted it. The sea does weirder things than that on a good day. My deckhand quit the next morning without even coming to the dock. I can't blame him. You want to know what I think was happening? Here's the part that keeps me up at night. I don't think the ocean ever saw our first crab back ritual as some gentle respect thing. I think it saw it as the beginning of an exchange, a tab, a running account. 15 years of me tossing that first one back, saying my little thank you, taking hundreds of thousands of pounds of life out of those same waters, losing the occasional tool, the occasional personal item, the occasional person. And then one night, for reasons I will never understand, it decided the ledger needed balancing. People talk about the sea taking and never giving. They're wrong. It gives. It gives back more than you want, all at once, in forms you're not ready for. Fish you released, reshaped and repurposed. Objects you dropped, fused into shell and bone. Faces you thought had dissolved into silt. Brought up whole and placed carefully where you can't pretend not to see them. That night, every pot I hauled felt like a statement. I remember. I remember this, and this, and this. Do you? I sold the boat before the season was over. Told the buyers it rode a little weird in heavy weather, that the engine had quirks. Never mentioned that I could still feel the pattern of those spirals under my feet when I walked the deck, like the steel itself had been imprinted. I moved inland after that. Took a job where the only water I think about is coming out of a hose. I don't throw things away anymore. Not really. Broken tools, old clothes, receipts. I keep them boxed up, stacked neatly, like I'm afraid of what might happen if I just let them go without acknowledgement. Because on some level, deep down, I've learned that nothing you drop into the dark is ever truly gone. The ocean doesn't forget. It just waits until it's ready to hand everything back at once and see what you do when it lays your history out at your feet. You ever had your ears pop so hard you tasted blood? Not from a plane, not from diving, but just standing on the deck of your own boat in the middle of the night, barely moving? That's the first sign that something's wrong with the world under you. Not the weather, not the gear, the world. I didn't understand that at first. I told myself it was a head cold, a pressure change, anything normal I could grab onto. But when your depth sounder shows the bottom racing up toward you from 1,200 feet and the ocean around your boat goes flat as glass in a 40-knot wind, you stop telling yourself comforting lies. You start realizing there are layers to this place, and one night off Kodiak, I slipped between them. I was fishing black cod on a longliner. Working alone because I trusted myself more than any deckhand who'd work for what I could pay. You spend enough seasons out of Kodiak, and the cold becomes a background condition you stop respecting as much as you should. That night was like any other early spring run. Air hovering around freezing, water colder than that, wind throwing spray that froze to the railings in sheets. I'd been hauling gear for hours, settled into that bone-deep rhythm where your body just moves, and your mind floats somewhere between the slap of water on hull and the creak of the boom. The sounder said I was over 800 fathoms. That's where the cod like to be, pressed right up against the edge of the shelf, in the dark where sunlight never even thinks about visiting. It hit me while I was coiling a section of line. A sharp, stabbing pain shot through both ears at once, making me stagger. Not the slow ache of a sinus thing. A drop-in elevator lurch that made my stomach flip. My vision blurred, then snapped back. I tasted metal on the back of my tongue. I straightened up, hand automatically going to the side of my head like I could press the pressure back where it belonged. The wind had been howling in the rigging seconds before. Now it sounded far away, like someone had closed a door between me and the world. I glanced at the depth sounder through the wheelhouse window, more to distract myself than anything. The digital numbers that had read 800 not long ago were rolling like an odometer gone mad. 700, 650, 550. as if the bottom itself was hurtling upward toward me. The boat didn't change motion. There was no grinding impact, no sense of shallows, just that relentless climb of numbers. I tapped the glass with a knuckle. It kept going. 400, 350. The part of my brain that knew charts and bottom contours whispered that what I was seeing was impossible unless a mountain was rising under me. I stepped to the rail and looked over. The water was wrong. You get used to seeing texture out there. Wind chop, swell, broken patterns of current. This looked like oil, perfectly smooth. The wind still hit my face with the same bite, but it wasn't touching the surface. It slid over it somehow. The boat didn't rock. It floated like it was set in resin. That's when the quiet really sank in. The slap of water against the hull was gone. No rattle of loose gear, no distant boom of swell hitting unseen rocks. Just the engine, thumping away like a heartbeat in a closed chest. I looked up, and for a second, my brain tried to reject what my eyes were telling it. The sky above me was full of stars, too many, like someone had taken a normal night and turned the brightness up until you could see every pinprick. But they were in the wrong places. Constellations I knew were twisted, bent out of shape. The North Star wasn't where it should have been. I turned in a slow circle and realized it wasn't the sky that was wrong. It was my reflection of it. Because there was a second surface below me. Not the seafloor, not rock or sand or anything solid. Another skin of water, maybe 100 feet down, perfectly mirroring the one my boat was sitting on. The stars I was seeing weren't in the sky. They were being reflected back from this second ocean under me, a twin of the first. Waves moved across it, but in the opposite direction to the faint motion I could feel under my boots. It was like standing between two ceilings, neither of them entirely above or below, just around. My depth sounder clicked over to 50 fathoms, then 20, then 10, then nothing. Just a blank line where the bottom should have been. I felt the pressure in my head worsen, like someone slowly tightening a vise around my skull. My right ear popped with an audible crack, pain flaring, and a warm trickle ran down my jaw. Blood. I spat onto the deck and watched the red smear sit on the steel instead of spreading. It looked too bright in that thin, sourceless light. That's when I saw the other boats. Not around me. Below me, on that lower surface. At first, they looked like shadows. Long, dark smudges sliding across the mirrored ocean. Then my eyes caught up, and I started recognizing shapes. Wheelhouses, masts, rigs. Boats from different eras, different designs. A wooden troller with peeling paint. A steel longliner like mine. Something older with a single mast and what might have been sails if you squinted. They were moving as if they were working a normal night. Gear out, crew silhouettes passing back and forth on their decks. I could see the glint of their running lights, faint but unmistakable, casting trembling streaks on that lower water. One of them passed directly under my hull, so close I felt a phantom jar like we should have collided. I staggered and grabbed for the rail. Looking down, I locked eyes with someone standing on that other deck. He was at the rail just like me, head tilted up, staring straight back. For a moment, I thought I was seeing myself. Same worn jacket, same knit cap, same tired lines in the face that long nights carve into you. Then he moved, and the motion was just wrong enough to break the illusion. His arms were a little too long. His shoulders sloped in a way no healthy humans do. And his eyes. They were set wider apart. Lids stretched taut over something that bulged slightly against them, like they'd been built for a pressure that would crush you and me in seconds. Behind him, on that warped twin of my boat, The crew moved with the same not-quite-right gait. Joints bending at off angles, necks turning in unnatural arcs as they checked lines, hauled gear, worked a fish I couldn't see. They reminded me of deep water creatures dragged up too fast, bodies puffed and twisted by sudden pressure change. But they were functioning in that shape, like it was normal. Adapted. My line jerked. I turned and saw slack running out off the stern. The long line I'd set hours before, the one that should have been hanging more or less where I'd left it, was moving. Not drifting. Being pulled. Steadily, with purpose. Straight down toward that mirror ocean. Hooks that should have been spread across hundreds of yards now trailed in a tight angle, all pointing toward one place. The pressure in my skull pulsed in time with the tug. I grabbed the hauler lever and tried to take strain, but the drum just hummed under my hand, line slicing off it as if something on the other end had more claim to it than I did. I made the mistake of looking down the line. It didn't just vanish into darkness. I could see it crossing the space between the two surfaces. A thin, pale rope bisecting reality, like someone had drawn a line with a pencil through a painting. It hit the lower water and kept going, disappearing into a third layer of dark that made my eyes water to look at. For a heartbeat, I had the horrible sense that if I traced that line far enough, I'd see other tiers below, stacked like pages. Oceans on oceans on oceans, each with their own boats, their own skies, their own people who thought they were working the only sea that mattered. The man below me, my almost reflection, raised his hand. It was a mirror of my own gesture when I shielded my eyes from glare. Then he did something I still don't like to think about. He turned his wrist upside down and pulled, a simple little jerk like you'd give a stubborn rope. My line went taut enough to sing, and the boat lurched, bow dipping as if something enormous had just taken hold of it from beneath. I dropped to one knee. For half a second, the wild thought flashed through my mind. He's fishing me. Fear does something strange to your sense of scale. I wasn't worried about losing gear anymore. I was suddenly, viscerally aware of just how small my hull was, how thin the steel was between my boots and whatever waited in that space if the boat slipped. I scrambled to the hauler and reached for the knife I kept there for emergencies. The line was humming, vibrating with a note I could feel in my teeth. Another yank from below made the whole structure shudder. I cut it. One clean swipe, and the tension snapped. The line whipped away, burning a stripe across my glove as it vanished into the gap between surfaces. The boat rocked once more, then settled. The pressure in my head eased by a fraction. When I looked back down, the boats on the lower ocean had drifted farther away, their running lights dimming like someone was turning down a rheostat. The almost me at the rail watched me for another few seconds, then turned away. Interest lost. He walked back to his gear, his body bending in those deep, adapted angles, already absorbed back into his own routine. The depth sounder blinked. Numbers flickered, scrambled, then snapped back to something that made sense for where I knew I was supposed to be. 1,200 fathoms, stable. The wind found the surface again. I heard the first honest slap of a wave against the hull and nearly cried with relief. The boat began to pitch in a way my body recognized. The engine sound changed, less muffled, more alive. It was like being let back into my own world after stumbling halfway into someone else's. I hauled the rest of the gear by hand as best I could, cursing every hook I'd lost, but quietly grateful for every one that wasn't tied to whatever that was. By the time I pointed the bow toward Kodiak, the sky had gone its usual flat, low gray, no extra stars, no mirror, Just a long ride home and a head that throbbed with each heartbeat. I reported nothing. What would I have said? Hey, the ocean opened up into multiple layers and I nearly got reeled into one where people aren't quite human. You don't keep your license long talking like that. I logged a gear loss. I noted a brief depth sounder malfunction. I told myself stories about thermoclines and freak atmospheric conditions and my own fatigue. Then I sold the boat at the end of the season and took a job that kept my feet on docks instead of decks. Here's the part I can't talk my way around, and it's the reason I'm telling you this. The pressure never really stopped. It comes back sometimes. I'll be standing in line at a grocery store or sitting in my kitchen nowhere near salt water, and my ears will pop out of nowhere. The room will tilt for a second. The lights will feel a little too bright, and I'll get the clear, unmistakable impression of someone standing directly below me, looking up through layers I can't see. Not malicious, not friendly, just curious. Like a fisherman watching a blip on his sounder and wondering if it's worth dropping a line. That's what haunts me. More than the mirror sea or the wrong-shaped men. The sense that on some chart I'll never lay eyes on, my life is just another mark in someone else's fishing grounds. And every now and then, on nights when the air is still and the sky is too clear, I swear I can feel that line between worlds go tight again, just for a moment, before whatever's on the other end decides to let me run a little longer. You ever start doing something without deciding to do it? Like your body made the choice before your mind caught up? That's how the counting began. Not as a habit, not as some superstition, but as a quiet little whisper in the back of my head that turned into the loudest thing in my life. I want you to understand this before I tell you the rest. I didn't decide to count those fish. The numbers arrived already finished, complete and perfect, before a single hook broke the surface. By the third set off Newport, I realized we weren't counting the fish at all. We were counting something circling the boat. It was a warm, flat August night. The kind people dream about when they think of tuna fishing and have no idea what the bad nights look like. Albacore season, 30 or 40 miles off the Oregon coast. The kind of run-and-gun trolling that keeps you wired even on no sleep. There were 3 of us on board. Me, my brother, and a green kid we'd taken on because he'd worked hard on the dock and said he didn't get seasick. Small boat, 16 troll lines out, gear humming, deck sticky with scales and blood. We'd been picking fish steady all afternoon and well into the evening. The ocean had that cobalt flatness it gets when the wind dies and the swell evens out. Nothing dramatic, nothing ominous. Just work. The first time the kid did it, I didn't even notice. He was at the roll-up table, stacking troll jigs, and I heard him mutter, 47, under his breath. Thought he was talking to himself about something else. When we swung in the lines after a pass through a bait ball, we had exactly 47 tuna on deck. I remember joking about it. There you go. You're the tuna whisperer now. Call the next one for me. He laughed, embarrassed, shook his head, said he didn't know why he said it. We went back to work. Next pass, as I swung us around and the lines popped and bowed out behind us, the kid said, louder this time, 212. I glanced over at him. Counting the stars? I asked. He frowned like he'd just realized something. No, that's how many we're going to get. It hit me weird, the confidence in his voice. Not a guess, a statement. My brother rolled his eyes and told him if we pulled 212 tuna on one stop, he'd buy him a truck. We pulled 212 tuna on that stop. If you've ever fished albacore, you know how insane that is. Organized chaos. Fish flying, gaffs swinging, ice slush filling with silver bodies. We were buried in work, but that number hung there anyway. At one point, I glanced at the kid and saw his lips moving. He wasn't looking at the deck, not really. His eyes were unfocused, gazing somewhere past the rail, and he was counting under his breath, fast and steady. When we finally got a break and had a second to breathe, my brother did a rough tally. He stopped dead at the count, looked at me, and said, 212. No more, no less. That's when I started paying attention. It escalated quick after that. On the third big stop, the kid called it before we turned on the school. 89, he said, hand resting on one of the outriggers. We'll get 89 this time. I remember asking him how he knew. He just shook his head, rubbing his temple like he had a headache. I just do, he said. There was fear in his voice now, thin and tight. We made the pass, lines went off, deck turned into a blur. 90 fish would have been a miracle. We ended up with 89. You can feel it, can't you? The moment something stops being a coincidence. That was it for me. The numbers were too clean, too exact. Not around 80, not a couple hundred. Precise. I started testing it. I'd change the pattern last second, turn the boat a different way, sit a little longer before the turn. Didn't matter. Whatever number he said, that's what hit the deck. It wasn't that he was good at estimating. It was like the fish were obeying the number. After a while, he stopped saying them out loud. Didn't need to. I heard them anyway. I was at the wheel, eyes on the temp brakes and faint bird sign, when a number came into my head clear as spoken words. 1,847. No one had said it. The kid was outside. My brother was wrestling a big fish off the gaff. But there it was. Concrete and complete. 1,847. I felt my throat go dry. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on speed and angle and keeping the jig swimming right. It sat there in my mind, heavy as a stone. We hit what should have been an ordinary stop. Lines went off. 4 hooks, 6, 9. Froth of white water behind us, the boat pulling sideways from the drag. We worked until our shoulders burned. When we finally had a chance to breathe and my brother started adding up the totes, I knew what he was going to say before he said it. "You're not going to believe this," he called into the wheelhouse. 1847. Exactly. I didn't tell him I believed it just fine. The numbers didn't stay on the fish. That's the part I need you to understand. At some point they moved, slipped sideways. We were catching breath between stops, radio turned down low, everyone tired enough that conversation had dried up. I was looking at the glossy black water sliding past the hull, thinking about nothing in particular, when a new number landed in my head. 406. No context, no explanation, just there. Outside, the kid said, at the same instant. 406. I stepped out. 406 what? I asked. He flinched like I'd slapped him. You heard it too, he said. His voice shook. My brother leaned against the rail, frowning. He's been doing that for the last half hour, he said quietly. Random numbers. No idea what they mean. The kid wrapped his arms around himself like he was cold, though the night was mild. They're not random, he muttered. They're right. There's 406 of them. Of what? I asked. His eyes flicked toward the water. I don't know, he whispered. But they're close. The The next number came to all three of us at once. You ever have the word for something on the tip of your tongue and feel it click into place? It was like that, but with a number. 3,982. We all stiffened. My brother tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out thin. He started counting the lines, the jigs, anything he could see, trying to pin the number on something harmless. Nothing fit. The numbers kept coming. Sometimes small, sometimes huge. Always precise, always with that feeling behind them. Count completed, total known. We started arguing about them. It sounds stupid now. But there on the deck, with the boat rocking gently and the horizon a featureless ring of black, it felt like the most important thing in the world. I'd say, 102. And the kid would snap back, no, 105. And my brother would choke out, you're both wrong, it's 99. And all three of us would feel that sick, electric certainty that our number was the right one and the others were dangerously wrong. It wasn't about fish anymore. It was about tallying, picking the correct total for something unseen. That's when I realized we weren't deciding the numbers. We were being fed them. Every time one dropped into my head, it came with a sensation I don't have a clean word for. Awareness, maybe. Like suddenly knowing exactly how many chairs are in a restaurant you've never been to. The deck around us felt crowded without anyone standing there. I caught myself staring at empty air over and over, counting breaths, heartbeats, ticks of the second hand on the little bulkhead clock, trying to find what the numbers belonged to. And all the while, that feeling of being surrounded grew. The sky was clear. The sea was calm. There were no other boats in sight. But all three of us started glancing over the side more and more often. I don't know who saw them first. Maybe it was all three of us, at the same time, like the numbers. Shapes in the water. Just below the surface, pale forms hanging vertically, feet down, faces upturned. Not swimming, suspended. For every one my eyes picked out, the number in my head jumped. 46. 83. 122. They weren't fish. They weren't whales. They were roughly human-sized, outlines blurred by depth and motion, but enough there that you could fill in the rest if you dared. We all fell silent. The counting didn't. I stood at the rail and watched a pale arm drift up toward the hull, fingers splayed, then sink back down as if the effort had been too much. Limbs moved slowly, like everything down there was underwater again inside the water, dragging through something thicker than seawater. For every movement, a number pinged in my skull, relentless. 394, 395, 396. My brother started whispering under his breath, trying to keep up. The kid's lips were moving too fast, eyes glassy, tears cutting clean tracks through the salt crusted on his cheeks. "Get us out of here," my brother said. His voice sounded wrong, like it belonged to someone down in that dark column instead of on deck. I stumbled back to the wheel, hands numb. The engine turned over, but when I pushed the throttle forward, the boat barely answered. It was like trying to drive through jelly. The shapes in the water drifted closer, pale ovals under the surface, all those upturned faces following as we inched forward. The numbers in my head screamed upward. 700, 800, 9. I don't remember deciding to do it, but I reached out and slapped the breaker on the main sounder, killing the display. The depth, the fish marks, the digital clutter, all of it vanished. The counting eased, not stopped, just softened around the edges, like turning down the volume on a radio. I pulled the throttle back to idle and yanked the wheel hard over, then slowly eased it forward again, trying to feel my way out on muscle memory alone. No numbers, no readouts. Just the feel of the boat, the way it responded, the faint slap of wavelets returning as we slid off whatever slick patch we'd stumbled into. The shapes thinned. I didn't look straight at them. Just watched them out of the corner of my eye like you watch something you're afraid will notice you noticing. The numbers dropped. 500. 400. 3. My jaw ached from clenching it. The kid curled up on the deck, hands over his ears, rocking back and forth and mouthing strings of numbers I couldn't hear anymore. My brother clung to the rail, eyes squeezed shut, breathing like he'd just climbed a hill carrying a load of gear. When the boat finally picked up speed like it should, when the familiar feel of good clean water passing the hull returned, my knees nearly went out. The counting faded to a distant hum in the back of my mind, like tinnitus made of arithmetic. By the time we saw the faint loom of the coast on the horizon, it was gone. Not completely, though. Never completely. We didn't say much on the run in. What could we have said that didn't sound like madness? Hey, remember when our heads turned into abacuses for the dead? We tied up, offloaded what we had, nodded and grunted our way through questions on the dock. Slow night, we said. Just couldn't find the marks. The kid never got back on the boat. Disappeared from the harbor. Last I heard, he was living inland. Stocking shelves at some warehouse, no bodies of water larger than a retention pond in sight. My brother lasted one more trip before he moved to Nevada. Told me on the phone that sometimes, when the casino floor was particularly crowded, he'd feel that old sensation again, knowing exactly how many people were around him, numbers falling into place like chips. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I kept fishing. What else was I going to do? But I fish alone now. No crew, no witnesses. And I don't let myself count. Not fish, not waves, not steps, not anything. If I catch myself starting 1, 2, 3, I stop, cold, and force my mind onto something else. Because in the weeks after that night, something became very clear. The numbers weren't about fish. They weren't even about the pale shapes under the hull. They were about attention, about connection. We were tuning into something that had been counting all along. Sometimes, when I'm lying in my bunk offshore and the boat is rocking just enough to keep you from real sleep, I'll feel it again. That pressure behind the eyes. That sensation of totals being calculated somewhere just out of reach. And I'll wonder how many things in the deep are being cataloged, tallied, kept track of. Hooks, boats, voices on the radio, heartbeats on a deck. I wonder which number is mine. Then I remind myself not to wonder too hard. Because out there, some things don't like being noticed back. And whatever we brushed up against that night off Newport had already counted us long before we ever thought to count anything at all. You ever had someone ask you a question so politely that your mouth said yes before your brain had a chance to weigh in? Hold on to that feeling for a second. Now imagine the person asking isn't standing in a doorway or at your table. They're hanging off the side of your boat in 40-degree water, wearing a soaked suit and tie, smiling like they've been waiting their whole life for you specifically to answer them. That's what I live with now. Not what happened after, not the nightmares, but the memory of the moment my own manners almost killed me. I was trolling alone for late-season coho out of Sitka. One of those October weeks where you're squeezing the last fish out before the weather closes in, and common sense tells you to stay tied up. Small boat, spreads out both sides, gear humming, autopilot doing most of the steering while I work the deck. It was that deep coastal dark you only get up there in fall. Cloud ceiling pressing down, no moon, just the dim glow of my running lights on a strip of restless water. Wind sharp enough to sting your cheeks. The kind of night where the world feels very far away and very close at the same time. I remember I was cleaning up after bleeding a couple of fish when I felt the line. Not the fishing lines, the little utility line I keep over the side to rinse tools and buckets. It gave a sharp, unnatural tug, the kind that says something solid has grabbed hold. I figured I'd snagged some floating debris, maybe a log. I went over, wrapped the rope around my hand, and hauled. A hand came up with it. Not a glove, not a piece of junk. A human hand, pale in my deck lights. Fingers clamped tight around the line like it belonged there. It was attached to an arm in a black suit sleeve, cuff buttoned, fabric soaked and slick. I dropped the rope, heart hammering, and stumbled back hard enough to hit the rail. The hand loosened, slid down the rope, and then a head broke the surface, calm as you please. He looked like he'd stepped out of a boardroom and straight into the North Pacific. Mid-30s maybe, hair neatly combed back despite the water streaming off it, white shirt plastered to his chest, tie floating like a dead thing around his neck. His skin had that waxy, too smooth look of something that's been cold for a long time. But his eyes were clear, focused, and locked on me like I was the only thing in the world that interested him. "Good evening, Captain," he said. Perfect diction. No shiver in his voice. No gasping, just a crisp greeting, like we were meeting at a hotel bar instead of off Baranoff Island in October, with the water a degree or two above freezing. My brain did that little stutter it does when reality trips. You know that half second where you're waiting for someone to shout that it's a joke? No one shouted. It was just me and this man in the water. He smiled. Small, polite, nothing showing teeth. "Might I come aboard?" he asked. That's the line that stuck a hook in me. Not "help me," not "I'm drowning," not "for the love of God, throw me a ladder." Might I come aboard? Like he was asking to step over my threshold. Every lesson I'd ever learned about the sea screamed at me at once. You don't leave people in the water. You don't ignore a voice calling out. You don't treat another human being like driftwood. And I opened my mouth to say yes. The word was right there, ready to fall out. Because that's what you say when someone asks something in that tone. You say yes. Instead, what came out was, "How are you not dead?" The smile twitched, just a little. "I've been waiting for you," he said, like that explained anything. Might I come aboard? He said it exactly the same way. Same cadence, same mild upward lilt at the end, like there were rules to how the question had to be asked. I didn't answer him. I couldn't. Something in my gut had clenched hard, a cold knot that felt older than me. I backed toward the wheelhouse without taking my eyes off him. His head turned to follow, body floating upright without any visible effort. I've seen what cold water does to you. The gasping, the spasms. This wasn't that. He held himself like he was standing on a floor that happened to be liquid. "Another time, perhaps," he said when I got the door between us. No irritation, no anger, just a gentle disappointment, the way you'd talk to someone who'd just declined a drink. Then he sank straight down. Not a splash, not a flail. Just submerged, eyes still on mine until the dark closed over them. You ever be so shaken by something that you decide not to think about it? That's what I did. I told myself I was tired, that I'd imagined his voice, that maybe it had been a body, and my mind had slapped a face and sound on it so it wouldn't crumble. I didn't call it in. I didn't turn back. I went on fishing. The ocean's good at teaching you to compartmentalize. Next night, he came back. Same time, near enough. I was working the starboard side when the cleaning line gave that tug again. My gut dropped. My hands went cold. I walked to the rail like I was sleepwalking, and there he was, rising up out of the dark on that thin rope like it was an elevator. Same suit, same hair, same polite, utterly wrong composure. "Good evening, Captain," he said. "Might I come aboard?" Water streamed off his shoulders, breath frosted in the air that wasn't cold enough for that. His eyes tracked every flicker of my expression like he was studying me for a test. "You're not real," I said before I could stop myself. "Stupid thing to say to something talking to you." He smiled a little wider at that. "I've been waiting a very long time," he replied. "We don't get many chances in these waters. Oh, occasionally a door opens, a welcome is extended, but not to me. I'm so glad you came alone." He tilted his head, as if appraising my reaction. "Might I come aboard?" I managed to say no. Barely. The word felt thick in my mouth, like the air had turned to syrup. His eyes flickered, like I'd surprised him slightly. Then he nodded. "Of course, I understand. Another time then." He let go of the line, floated backward a few feet without kicking, and vanished again. You're probably thinking I should have gone in after that. Headed for port, called a priest, a doctor, a psychologist, all three. But fishing is about routines and obligations, and I had gear in the water and bills on land and a streak of stubborn that didn't like the idea of being chased off my grounds by a hallucination in a suit. So yeah, I went back out the third night. By then, I'd made rules for myself. I'd stay in the wheelhouse more. I'd ignore any tugs on the cleaning line. I'd keep the deck lights brighter, like that would somehow help. It didn't matter. Some invitations aren't about doors, they're about attention. I knew he was there before the line moved. The hair on my arms prickled, the air tasted metallic, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw him. Not rising up this time, just waiting. Face just above the surface, eyes on the boat. I held out longer that night. Didn't go to the rail, didn't open the door. Just stood there with one hand on the wheel and one on the throttle, locked in place while something treaded water in the dark outside, like it had all the time in the world. When I finally stepped out, to check gear, that's what I told myself. He spoke before I even looked directly at him. "Good evening, Captain. Might I come aboard?" His voice was closer now, like he didn't need to raise it to reach me. The water around him was too still. No ripple, no current. Just a man, upright, waiting for an answer. I said no again. Quicker this time. He didn't sink, didn't leave. Just stayed there alongside the boat, moving with it like he was tethered to the hull. "I won't force my way," he said conversationally. "That wouldn't be correct. There are rules. You know about rules, don't you? Weather windows, quotas, closures, lines you must not cross unless you're willing to accept what comes with it." He smiled like we were sharing a joke. "I'm bound too. I may ask, I may wait, I may follow. But I may not cross without your leave." He stayed all night. You don't know what pressure is until you spend 6 hours with something like that, pacing your boat. Never raising its voice, never threatening, just asking over and over, in that perfectly modulated tone, "Might I come aboard?" Sometimes he'd fall silent for 10, 20 minutes, and I'd think maybe he'd gone. Then the rope would twitch, and there he'd be again, expression patient. Every time I moved across the deck, his head turned. When I went into the wheelhouse, he watched through the window. When I looked away, I could feel his attention like fingers on the back of my neck. By dawn, my nerves were shot. My body ached from tension. My voice was raw from saying no more times in one night than I had in my whole life. Back at the dock, with other boats and voices around me, he seemed ridiculous. A ghost story you tell yourself when you're too long alone. I almost convinced myself I wouldn't see him again. Fourth night. He didn't wait to be pulled up. I stepped onto the deck and he was already there, hands lightly resting on the rail from the outside, chin level with the top, like he'd been waiting for me to emerge. "Good evening, Captain," he said softer now. "Might I come aboard?" I don't know if it was the exhaustion, or the way his fingers tightened when I flinched back, or the quiet edge of something like loneliness in his voice, but my resolve cracked. Every part of me knew that word shouldn't leave my mouth. That everything on the water that needs permission to come in is something you don't want inside. But standing there with the cold leaching through my boots and the endless dark pressing close, my defenses slipped. "Yes," I said. He moved, not like someone climbing a ladder, not the scrambling of a man desperate to escape the sea. One moment he was outside the rail, water up to his chest. The next, he was stepping lightly onto the deck, shoes somehow making no sound on the wet steel. The suit dripped, but didn't cling. He smelled not like the ocean, but like a room that's been closed up too long. Stale air and something faintly sweet, almost floral, gone just a bit sour at the edges. "Thank you," he said, and there was genuine gratitude in it. That might have been the worst part. Up close, you see things you miss at a distance. The skin at his hairline didn't quite meet his scalp right, like it had been stretched back into place and smoothed. His eyes were a shade too bright for the dim light, pupils slow to adjust. When he smiled, the expression reached his lips, but not his cheeks. As he walked past me, I felt a cold so deep it made the Kodiak winter feel mild. It got into my teeth, my bones. He didn't attack, didn't lunge. He sat down on one of the fish boxes like a guest taking the offered chair at a kitchen table, folded his hands, and looked around with quiet interest. "You've kept her in good shape," he said, glancing at the rails, the rigging. "Better than I kept mine, I think. It's different, being aboard by invitation. There's an obligation, you understand. I must show you something now that I'm here. That's how this works." "I don't want to see anything," I managed. My voice sounded thin in my own ears. He tilted his head. "That isn't up to you anymore," he said, not harshly, just stating a fact. He unbuttoned his jacket. The movement was slow, deliberate, like part of a ceremony. The fabric parted, and there should have been a shirt beneath, a chest, a body with some remnant of warmth. There wasn't. There was depth, not metaphorical depth, not a poetic sense of "this man has seen things." Actual depth. Looking into that open jacket was like leaning over the rail in the dead of night and staring straight down into water that never ends. Dark and darker still, miles upon miles collapsing into a span of a few inches. In that space, I saw lights, running lights, flares, the dim glow of wheelhouse windows from boats that never made it home. They drifted, slowly circling some vast, unseen center, winking out one by one as they were swallowed by greater dark. Voices echoed up from there. Fragments of last calls, half-remembered prayers, the flat recitation of coordinates. All the panicked words ever spoken into radios as water rose over boots, knees, chests. All the shouts cut off mid-syllable as decks tilted and rails went under. Every mayday that never reached the Coast Guard, every whispered, "not like this," swallowed by a wave. I couldn't move. He leaned forward slightly, and the view shifted. For an instant, I saw my own boat in there, tiny against the backdrop of impossible distance, running lights bright and eager, wake trailing like a signature across black ink. I saw myself at the wheel, younger, laughing into a radio at some dumb joke. Then that version of me flickered and was gone, absorbed into the drifting lights. He closed the jacket. The sound of the ocean came crashing back all at once, wind, waves, rigging rattling. I realized I'd stopped hearing any of it while that place was open in front of me. My knees gave. I hit the deck, hands slipping in water, lungs hauling air like I'd been held under. "There," he said quietly. "Now you understand. I'm not the one who comes for you. I'm just the one who asks, the door opener." He stood, smoothing his jacket like a man preparing to leave a party. "You invited me. I showed you what waits. We're square." He stepped back to the rail. For the first time, his politeness wavered, and something like hunger showed through, sharp and bright in his eyes. "Others won't ask," he added. "They'll just take the open door and leave you worse than I did. Be careful what you say yes to." Then he tipped backward off the rail with the easy grace of someone stepping off a curb. No splash, no flailing limbs, just gone. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the cold to get in deep. Long enough for the sky to start lightening in the east. I made it home on burned-out instincts and muscle memory. Within a week, the boat was on the market. People asked why. I told them what they expected to hear. Tired, done with the grind. Time to be smart before the sea collected its due. The real truth is simpler and harder. I learned that night that yes is more dangerous offshore than any storm, that not everything that asks permission deserves the courtesy of an answer. Now, even on land, I watch my words. I don't say come in unless I mean it. I don't say sure just to be polite. And sometimes, waking in the small hours, tasting salt that shouldn't be there, I feel that old cold seep under the door and then hear a soft, familiar voice in the back of my mind. "Good evening. Might I?" I don't let it finish. I never let it finish. You know how a sound can get into your head so deep that you start hearing it even when it stops? Not a song. Those are annoying but harmless. I'm talking about a rhythm, a knock, a pattern that crawls under your skin and syncs up with things that shouldn't have anything to do with it. That's what took me off the water in the end. Not a storm, not a rogue wave, not some freak accident. A stupid little engine knock that wouldn't stay in the engine and wouldn't stay out of me. I was running bottom fish out of Westport that winter, just me and a 40-footer I'd put too many miles on. Rockfish, lingcod, a few other odds and ends when I could get them. It was one of those slate-gray nights where the sky and ocean are the same color, and the only difference is which way the wind is hitting your face. The bar had been bumpy on the way out. But once I was in deeper water, it settled into that long, slow roll that's almost comforting if you've done it long enough. The diesel was doing its usual thing. Steady thrum under my boots, a kind of mechanical heartbeat you stop noticing after a while. Except that night, there was an extra beat. At first it was faint, a double knock under the engine noise. Knock, knock, pause, knock, knock, pause. Slow, too regular to be random. I thought injector, mount, loose something banging around the compartment. I told myself I'd check it after the next drift. You know how that goes. You hear something, you file it under later, and you keep working because the rod tips are bouncing and you've got bait in the water. The knock didn't care. It kept going. Knock, knock, pause. Knock, knock, pause. After 20 minutes, it stopped sounding like a problem and started sounding like a song. When you're out there alone, sounds keep you company whether you want them or not. I found myself timing things to it without meaning to. Cast on knock 1, flip the bail on knock 2, check the depth sounder on the pause. It seeped into my hands, my breathing. I noticed I was tapping my fingertips against the rail in perfect sync. That's when a thought crept in that I really did not like. What if the engine wasn't knocking along with me? What if I was knocking along with it? I decided to break the pattern. Easiest way to do that is with the throttle. I nudged it forward. The revs climbed, the thrum quickened, and the knock sped up right with it, never missing a beat. Knock, knock, pause, just faster now. I pulled back hard, dropping almost to idle. The whole boat shuddered as the stern fell off a swell, engine lugging for a moment before settling. The knock slowed, perfectly proportional. At that exact moment, something else happened. I heard answering taps. Not from the engine room, from the hull. If you've ever been on a steel boat in any kind of chop, you know the random bangs and groans of water and structure. This wasn't that. This was a reply. Knock, knock, pause, knock, knock, echoing from somewhere below my feet, matching the engine's offbeat tick exactly. I froze in the wheelhouse doorway, hands still on the throttle, and listened. Engine knock, hull knock, pause, together. Again, again, like a call and response in some language I didn't want to learn. I told myself it had to be something simple. Loose plate, gear shifting with the roll. I grabbed a headlamp and opened the engine hatch, breathing in the hot oil stink. The knock hit me harder down there, closer, vibrating in my teeth. The diesel block rocked on its mounts, pistons hammering away, but nothing looked obviously wrong. Then I realized the knock wasn't coming from the engine itself. It was coming from everywhere. The exhaust elbow, the mounts, the shaft coupling, all of them seemed to hitch in the same tiny moment, like the whole system was being jerked by an invisible hand on that beat. And under it, faint but clear, came that second answer. Knock, knock on the hull, from outside, traveling up through the frames. I killed the engine. Instant silence never feels natural offshore, but this was worse. The sudden absence of the diesel made my ears ring. For 3 heartbeats. My heartbeats. Loud in my head, there was nothing. Then, from the starboard side, close to the waterline, knock, knock, pause. Same pattern, same spacing. No engine to hide behind it now. Just 2 knocks, then quiet, then 2 knocks again. You know that feeling when you're sure someone is standing just on the other side of a wall? That's what it felt like. Like something was right there, pressing lightly, politely, on the outside of my hull. I stood in the center of the cabin and realized my own heart had started following along. Thump, thump, rest. Thump, thump, rest. My pulse was speeding up to match the rhythm outside, like it had found a conductor it preferred. I snapped, climbed out onto the deck, barefoot in my socks like an idiot, and stomped over to the side where the sound was strongest. The water was black and close and featureless. No flotsam. No log banging. Just that sound when I laid my palm flat against the steel. A tiny, almost gentle double tap from the other side, right under my hand. The metal vibrated under my skin. My fingers twitched, and then, God help me, they tapped back. Knock, knock. I didn't think about doing it. I just did. The reply was immediate. Knock, knock, a little louder now. My hand moved again, like someone else was piloting it. Knock, knock. The engine was off. The swell was small. The sky was empty. But there I was, standing on my own deck, having a conversation in knocks with something invisible in 30 fathoms of dark. I yanked my hand back like I'd stuck it on a hot stove. The urge to put it back down, to keep playing along, was so strong it made my skin crawl. I stumbled back into the wheelhouse, slammed the hatch, and fired the engine up just to have some human noise, some familiar chaos between me and that beat. The knock returned, of course. Both of them, engine tick and hull tap, perfectly meshed. Only now there was something new. The boat itself had joined in. I watched the overhead lights start to stutter, not flickering randomly, but flashing on the same beat. 2 pulses, pause. 2 pulses, pause. The bilge pump kicked on, even though there was nothing to pump, cycling in time. The VHF, turned down low, spat out little bursts of static that sat exactly in the gaps. My world had become a drum circle, and whatever was leading it was outside. I tried to drown it out. Cranked the radio, then music, then both. It didn't matter. That pattern burrowed under everything. You can't not hear something that's gotten into your breath. Here's where it gets stranger. The longer it went on, the less it felt like the boat was following the rhythm, and the more it felt like the rhythm was in charge. I'd make tiny, pointless adjustments. Tapping the throttle, changing course by a degree or two, just to prove I could still do something unscripted. The boat responded, but the beat didn't change. My foot started bouncing in time, heel thumping the deck. When I tried to stop it, the muscles twitched painfully under the skin, like they were being held in place and resented the interference. I got the bright idea to try to throw it off with my own pattern. You know, like clapping off beat to mess with a metronome. I took a deep breath and started knocking on the wheelhouse wall. 3 quick taps. Then a long pause. 3 taps. Long pause. I managed maybe 4 repetitions before the engine note started to waver. Actually waver, as if it were offended. The whole boat shuddered in this awful, full-body way, and then everything snapped back, and I was knocking in the old pattern. Knock, knock, pause. My hand had switched back without me telling it to. My chest hurt. My heart had jumped to match. That was the first real fear, not of something out there, but of what was happening in here, in my body. I went back down to the engine room, because physical work has a way of cutting through panic. Tools, bolts, things you can touch. The knock was a storm in that little metal box, echoing off every surface. I started tapping along just to keep my hands from shaking. Somewhere between tightening a clamp that didn't need tightening and checking an oil level that was fine. I realized my breathing had fallen into the pattern too. In for 2 beats, hold. Out for 2 beats, hold. I stopped, forced myself to take a longer breath, and instantly felt lightheaded, like I'd broken some compulsory schedule. There's a word for when 2 rhythms lock together. Entrainment. I didn't need the science. I could feel it. Whatever was outside had entrained my boat. My boat had entrained my body. And my body was trying damn hard to entrain my mind. Thoughts started coming in pulses, not flow. 2 flashes of memory, blank. 2 flashes of fear, blank. Like someone was flipping a switch in my head on that same stupid knock-knock. I made a decision that probably saved me. I shut it all off. Main breaker, electronics, everything but the navigation lights. I killed. The engine noise died. The subtle hum of pumps and fans faded. For a second, there was nothing. Then the knock came again. Once, more distant. Just the hull. Knock, knock. Pause. I stood there in the dim glow from the instruments that had their own internal batteries and focused on something else. My own heartbeat. I counted it on purpose, out loud, making sure it didn't line up. 1, 2, 3. Pause. 1, 2. Slow, uneven, ugly. It hurt, but it was mine. The knock didn't stop. It never stopped. But a gap opened between it and me, just wide enough to wedge my will into. I don't know how long I stood like that, fighting for my own rhythm. 10 minutes. An hour. Long enough that when I finally nudged the engine back to life, the knock felt a little less like a command and a little more like an unwanted background noise again. It was still there. It stayed there all the way back to the bar and into the harbor, tapping and tapping and tapping. But my heart had its own stutter, and my breath found its own cadence. And the boat, bless her old stubborn hull, started creaking offbeat in ways that felt like defiance. I hauled her out 2 days later, paid a mechanic more than I should have to go over every inch of that engine. He found a few things he could point at, the way they do when they know you need an answer. A worn mount, a slightly out-of-spec injector, something rattling in the exhaust. He tightened, he replaced, he reassured. When we fired her up on the hard, the knock was gone. Except it wasn't. Not really. I heard it that night, lying in my bunk on shore, nowhere near the boat. Knock, knock, pause, right under my pillow. I felt it in my chest when I walked the docks. In the way my feet struck the boards, 2 steps, little hitch, 2 steps, hitch. Sometimes I catch myself tapping my fingers on the table in that pattern, not because I hear it, but because I don't, and some part of me misses it. That scares me more than anything that happened off Westport. I sold the boat by the end of the season. Told everyone I was done with the grind, that I wanted to sleep through a winter without worrying about forecast updates at 3 a.m. They nodded and told me I'd earned it. They don't know that I still wake up some nights with my hand pressed flat against the bedroom wall, fingers moving against the drywall in a soft, automatic knock-knock, waiting for an answer from the other side that, God willing, never comes. You ever had someone in your family teach you a signal that only belongs to you? A little code that says, I'm here, it's me, you're safe, even when you can't see the person sending it. That's what a 3-2-1 blink was for us. 3 flashes, pause, 2 flashes, pause, 1 flash. My grandfather used it with his old signer on foggy nights, so my dad would know which set of lights belonged to home when half the fleet was out. My dad taught it to me like it was a secret handshake. By the time I had my own boat running out of Prince Rupert, I hadn't seen that signal in decades. I thought it had died with him. I was wrong. It was August, peak salmon season, and the boat was loaded with family. My son, my nephew, my cousin. We ran the signer like our fathers had. Working long, stupid hours because that's what you do when the fish are in and the weather holds. That night was one of those rare gifts. Barely any swell, no wind, air cool but not cold. The sky a black dome with no shoreline light bleeding into it. Perfect for seeing navigation lights. We'd set the net on a good sign, jumps on the surface, the sounder lit up, and we're slowly closing the circle. The boat idling as the cork line tightened around the school. I was in the wheelhouse watching the drum when my son stepped in and said, "There's another boat off the east. Looks like they're working too." I glanced out. Sure enough, about a mile off, there was a set of running lights. White masthead, green starboard, the faint glow you get from deck lights washing the water around them. Nothing unusual. At night, you keep track of other boats the way you keep track of rocks in the daytime. I watched the other vessel for a moment, then did what any decent skipper does when someone's near. Grab the spotlight. We've got this unspoken courtesy up here. You see someone, you give them a quick blink with the spot. Nothing aggressive, just a, I see you, I'm over here. Let's not run into each other. I swung the beam their way and flashed 3 times, quick and spaced. Not our family code, just normal signaling. Then I lowered the light and went back to business. The other boat's lights went dark. For 5 long seconds, that chunk of sea was an empty patch of night. Then every visible light on the vessel blinked back in a pattern that made my skin crawl. 3 flashes. Pause. 2 flashes. Pause. 1 flash. My son laughed in this weird, uncertain way and said, "Hey, that's your granddad's thing, right?" My mouth had gone dry. I hadn't seen that blink since I was a kid standing on the dock, watching a much smaller, older seiner slide in through fog thicker than milk. 321 meant family. It meant we made it. No one outside us ever used it. No one alive outside us even knew it. I told myself it was coincidence. Guys play with their lights sometimes. Bored, cruise, too much coffee. But the hair on my arms stood up anyway. I flashed the spot again, this time deliberately in that family pattern, half angry at myself even as I did it. 3, pause, 2, pause, 1. The answering blink came faster, almost eager. 3, 2, 1. They were using my signal. We pulled the set and reset the net, pretending we weren't watching them. The other boat held distance, pacing us like they were working the same patch. Every few minutes, their lights would go through those 3, 2, 1 again. It got under my skin. My cousin asked if I knew who it was. No, I lied. The truth was worse than not knowing. This felt like something I knew too well. When you've spent your life on the water, you learn your home grounds the way a city kid learns streets. I knew every local boat by their running light configuration, by the way they moved. This one didn't quite fit anything. Taller mast than most, a certain angle to the deck lights. Old-fashioned almost. I found myself drifting closer, just to try and get a better sense of their silhouette. As we moved, so did they. Always keeping the same distance. Never quite closing, never falling behind. When we set our net in a new position, their lights shifted too. Sliding into a place that would have tangled any real gear if they were actually setting where they seemed to. But there was no radio chatter. No gruff voice saying, "Hey, watch your spread." Just that intermittent code flashing across the water. Then the radio started clicking. Not voices, not static. Clicks on channel 16, the working channel everyone monitors, coming in that same pattern. 3 quick breaks. 2, 1. My son stared at the speaker like it might start talking. You get used to voices on the VHF, the accents, the tones, even particular people. This was mechanical, like someone tapping the push to talk without bothering to speak. I reached for the mic, then stopped. If I called my own boat name into that void and got my granddad's signal back, I didn't know what I'd do. Instead, I switched to a different channel. Called a buddy who I knew was somewhere in the general area, asked if he saw anyone working east of us. "Nope," he said. "You're alone out there, far as I can see." "Why?" I said no reason, and left it at that. We closed up the net and started hauling. If you've never watched a seiner work at night, it's all about rhythm. Winch whine, corks piling, the slow, satisfying appearance of the bunt full of fish at the end. I tried to lose myself in that. But every time I glanced up, those lights were still there, a mile or so off, keeping pace. 3, 2, 1, over and over. The guys on deck started whispering. I pretended not to hear. When we finally got the net aboard and the fish down the hatch, I made a decision I still don't know whether to call brave or dumb. I told the crew to grab coffee, then turned the wheel and headed straight toward the unknown boat. Maybe it's just someone playing around, my nephew said, trying to convince himself more than me. We'll go say hi, that's all. My son didn't say anything. He just watched the lights getting bigger through the windshield, expression tight. As we closed the distance, something started to feel wrong at a level underneath surface details. You know how certain things in life have weight to them? This had that, but backward. The boat ahead seemed too light on the water. No matter what the swell did, its masthead stayed at the same horizon line, like it wasn't really subject to the same motion we were. The color of its deck lights was off too, a little too white, with no trace of the yellow you get from old sodium bulbs. My hand tightened on the wheel. We got close enough that the spot should have painted the name across the bow. I flicked it on, sweeping across. For a moment, the beam glowed on empty air. Then it hit Hull. The letters on the bow made my heart stop. It was the name of my grandfather's boat, the one that had gone down in a winter blow before I was born. I'd seen that name on logbooks, in photos, in the faded carving on a scrap of wood my grandmother kept on a shelf like an altar. I'd never seen it on water. The hull under it matched the pictures in every detail. Older style, high bow, the particular curve of the stern. Only this version was wrong. The paint was blistered and peeling, the metal streaked with rust and marine growth. Nets hung in tatters. The wheelhouse windows were smeared from the inside with something that caught the light and glistened. Figures moved on deck. They weren't clear. The spotlight cut through them in stuttering slices as the boat rolled, giving me glimpses of old rain gear, knit caps, the kind of clothing you only see in sepia photos now. They worked as if they were hauling gear, hands grasping rope that wasn't there, muscles straining against non-existent weight. One of them broke off from the rest and walked to the rail, exactly opposite where I stood. He lifted a handheld light, blinked it. 3, 2, 1. Even from that distance, even under the distortion of years and salt and some other thing I don't have a word for, I knew the set of those shoulders. The way he stood, feet planted against the roll. I'd grown up watching my father stand like that, and I'd seen the same posture in one blurry black and white of the man before him, my grandfather. He raised his free hand in a little half-wave, the one our family always used coming back into harbor, casual and understated and somehow full of meaning. Come on, that wave said. You know this. We're us. You're one of us. Come closer. The radio clicked again. 3, 2, 1. My son whispered, Dad, in a tone that had more child in it than I'd heard since he was small. My nephew backed away from the window, shaking his head over and over. For a moment, I thought about answering the light with mine, matching blink for blink, just like Dad had done decades before. My hand even reached toward the spotlight switch. Then something, call it instinct, call it memory, stood up inside me and said no so loudly it might as well have been a voice in my ear. I killed the spotlight, throttled up, threw the wheel hard over. The boat shuddered as we started to turn. In the dark, with only our own running lights painting the water, those other lights seemed to slide sideways in a way that didn't match our motion. like they were fixed points and we were the ones skidding along some curved surface. For a few seconds, it felt like we weren't going to clear them, like no matter what I did, our bow would always be pointed straight at that ghost seiner and the figures on its deck. Then the angle shifted. The distance grew. Their 3-2-1 pattern flashed once more. Slower now. A goodbye, if you can call it that. My grandfather's shape at the rail didn't wave again. He just watched us go, light held steady in his hand until the night swallowed him. On the way back in, my son asked me how I'd known it was him. I didn't answer. The truth was, I didn't know anything. I just felt it, the same way you feel when someone who shares your blood walks into a room without making a sound. It wasn't just him out there. It was the whole weight of everyone who'd ever not come back, condensed into one boat sliding silent along the line where the sky meets the sea. We told the others in the harbor we'd had a light issue and turned in early. No one questioned it. Everyone has nights they don't want to talk about. But word gets around in other ways. A few weeks later, an older skipper, one who'd known my grandfather when he was young, cornered me on the dock and asked very softly if I'd ever seen the Pride, my grandfather's boat, out past the Cape. I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. He nodded like he'd expected that and said, "She calls family, that one, always did." I still fish, but not in that patch anymore. And I pay attention to the way other boats blink their lights. When I see 3 flashes by accident, sled lights on shore, a tower, anything, I feel my stomach drop. Because here's the part that keeps me up. Signals are meant to be answered. They're built for call and response. That night, I broke the chain my grandfather started. Sometimes, between waking and sleep, I hear the soft click of a radio keying up with no voice behind it, and I wonder how many times more that code will be flashed across black water before someone in my family finally answers it again. You ever have the ocean hand something back to you that you know for a fact it swallowed years ago? Not driftwood, not random trash. Something that was yours. Something you watched disappear beneath the surface and grieved over. Because that's what the sea does. It takes. Now imagine it starts giving everything back. Not just your losses, everyone's, all at once. That's what happened to me off the Mendocino coast, running rockfish on a little boat that should have been too small to carry what the water tried to return. I've worked that stretch between Point Arena and Fort Bragg long enough to know every reef like the lines on my own palms. The boat was nothing fancy. 30-something feet, old diesel, stubborn personality. It was just me on board, like most days. Rockfish, lingcod, whatever the regs allowed, and the bottom felt like sharing. I've always been the careful type, measured, conservative. Throw the shorts back gently, don't leave line on the structure, don't take more than your gut says is right. The kind of person who thanks the ocean quietly under their breath after a good haul, even if no one's around to hear. For a long time, it felt like that respect counted for something. That day started honest. Low ceiling, steady swell. Wind light, but carrying that cold bite you get when summer's on its way out. I set up on a section of broken rock I've been fishing since I was learning to walk on decks, dropped rigs, felt that familiar bump as lead found home. First drift, nothing remarkable. A couple fish, one nice keeper, one too small that I unhooked and eased back over. It kicked hard once and vanished into green. I remember thinking, good. Go eat and grow. You tell yourself little stories like that to make the killing feel balanced. Second drift. Things turned. When I brought the first rig up, I felt weight before I felt fight. Rockfish usually give you that stubborn, head-shaking pull, like they're offended you had the nerve to hook them. This was just dead weight. I cranked, annoyed, figuring I'd snagged kelp or trash. The line broke the surface, and my stomach dropped. It was that same fish, same marking on the side, same torn fin from some old predator's bite, same cloudy patch on one eye. I know what you're thinking. Rockfish can hang near structure, maybe it never left. But I'd watched it kick away, strong, disappear. And now it was dangling there, hook back in its mouth like nothing had happened. Except it didn't thrash this time. It just hung, barely moving. Gills flaring slow like it was running on borrowed time. I unhooked it again, fingers cold despite my gloves. Held it there, hovering in the water beside the boat. It twitched once, then seemed to look at me. Fish don't look at you. They stare through you. This one's eye tracked the shape of my hand, the movement of my wrist. I dropped it, unsettled. It sank instead of darting, straight down, like someone had cut a string. By the third drift, I'd convinced myself I was spooked over nothing. The mind grabs patterns where there aren't any, especially when you've been out there alone too long. I reset, dropped, felt bottom, worked the rig. When I lifted again, there was that dead weight. Same as before. Same resistance. My shoulders already felt tired before I saw what I'd hooked. This time, the fish weren't alone. And they came up in 2s and 3s, all wrong. Their bodies were too stiff, mouths barely moving, eyes too clear. One had a length of monofilament fused into its flank, the line disappearing cleanly into flesh like it had grown there instead of cutting it. Another's gill plate was pierced through by a rusted swivel that should have torn free long ago. A third, this one I knew for certain, had a scar along the side where I'd once accidentally nicked it with a knife while unhooking. I recognized that slip, that guilt, the way you remember exactly where you backed into a pole years after the dent's been fixed. Every one of them had something embedded that didn't belong. Hooks, bits of metal, scraps of net, old injuries and lost gear, all neatly displayed on my deck like exhibits in a case. I started seeing other things. A lure I hadn't used in years, paint mostly worn off, but the pattern still faintly visible. A custom job I'd lost on a bad snag 8 seasons back. A small red tackle box I knew down to the faded sticker on its lid because it had fallen overboard in rough weather when I was just starting out, and I'd watched it bob once, twice, and vanish. It came up tangled in the leader, like it had just been dropped. When I opened it, the foam inside was dry. The hooks in it were shiny. That's when a chill settled into me that had nothing to do with wind. You probably know the feeling of déjà vu, like you've seen something before. This wasn't that. This was the opposite. Jamais vu. Seeing what should be familiar and feeling like you've never really understood it until now. The ocean wasn't bottomless. It wasn't a place where things simply disappeared. It was a storeroom, a ledger. And for some reason, my little boat had been moved from the withdrawals side to the returns. The next drop confirmed it. I felt weight again, but this time there was fight in it. The rod bucked, line singing as whatever was down there tried to wedge itself back into rock. I leaned into it, muscle memory taking over, hauling slow and steady until colors showed beneath the surface. For a second, I thought I'd hooked something massive. The shape was all wrong for a single fish. It resolved into bodies. Not human, thank God, not yet. But a snarled mass of rockfish. Dozens of them, all threaded through each other on hooks and lines and bits of old gear. They weren't attached to my rig, so much as my rig was stuck in something that had been built over years, maybe decades. They weren't decomposing. They should have been torn, rotted, half-eaten at least. Instead, their flesh had this waxy, preserved look, colors muted but intact. Their mouths opened and closed in slow, perfect unison, like a single organism breathing through 100 gills. Between their bodies, woven like beads, were objects. A watch, its face cracked at 217, a key ring fat with corroded keys, a chipped mug from a diner 2 counties inland that I'd seen once in a photo on a missing person flyer. I cut the line, let the whole thing slide back into the dark. I didn't even try to salvage the lead. Money felt meaningless in that moment. You'd think that would be the end of it, that I'd have the sense to point the bow toward shore and call it. But fishermen have this stupid, stubborn streak. One more drift, one more pass, one more chance it'll go back to normal. So I reset, moved a little shallower, told myself I'd try once more, and if anything felt off, I'd be done. The last haul is what tore something in me I haven't fixed since. The weight was there, of course. Heavy, steady. As I cranked, something in my gut told me to stop. Just cut and go. I didn't listen. The surface bulged, and for a moment I couldn't make sense of what I was looking at. Then the shapes arranged themselves into understanding. Bodies. Human, this time. They were packed together in my hooks and line like the fish had been, suspended under the boat in an obscene cluster that lifted as one, water cascading off them in thick sheets. Old foul-weather gear hung from slack shoulders, colors washed out but still identifiable. Red slickers turned a dull wine color, yellow jackets dimmed to sick gold. Their faces were smooth, not bloated, not skeletal. Preserved like the fish, like they'd been kept in some perfect cold pocket where decay was more suggestion than law. Their eyes were closed, every single one. Mouths shut, no gasping. Hands folded or at their sides, not clawing. They looked like they'd laid themselves down in my gear to sleep. As the cluster rose higher, I saw details. A name patch over a chest I recognized from a memorial photo in Noyo Harbor. A wedding ring I'd seen on a knuckle clinking against a beer bottle the night before a boat went missing. A distinctive tattoo on a forearm, lined still crisp under a thin sheen of something like sea glass. They weren't all familiar. They didn't have to be. The point was clear enough. These were the oceans. Men and women who had gone overboard, gone down with vessels, vanished in squalls. People who'd slipped off decks in the dark and never bobbed back up. The ones we pour shots for and hang wreaths for and tell stories about. The ones we say the sea took, because it hurts to think of them alone down there. They weren't alone. They were in my line, on my deck, being handed back. The bodies didn't flop or thrash as the rig pulled them higher. They drifted, swaying gently together. A hand bumped the hull. Fingers brushed the rail. Their clothes were dry where they broke the surface, dry in a way that made no sense, shedding water as if they were repelling it. I could smell something. Not rot, not salt. Old air. Stale time. I don't remember making the cut. One moment they were there, rising. The next, the line went slack in my hands, and they were sinking, sliding back into green, faces shrinking, shapes dissolving into darkness. I dropped the rod. It clattered across the deck. My mouth tasted like metal. My legs wanted to fold. On the run back, the ocean looked the same as it always does. Wind on top, swell underneath, white streaks where waves broke on far-off rocks. But I couldn't stop seeing what sat beneath that surface in layers. Fish I'd tossed back, tools I'd fumbled, bodies no one had recovered. All of it cataloged, kept, not consumed. Waiting. You know how people say the sea is unforgiving? I used to think that meant it takes and doesn't care. Now I think it means the opposite. It cares too much. It remembers too well. There's an accounting going on down there, a balance sheet we don't get to see until, for some reason, our little column is due for review. I stopped fishing not long after that. Sold the boat. Moved inland, as far from the smell of brine as I could manage while still staying in the state. People ask why, and I give them the usual answers. Regulations tightening, quotas shrinking, getting older. No one really believes me, but they nod, because they've all got their own reasons they don't talk about. Here's the part I don't tell them. Since that day, the ocean hasn't stopped returning things to me. Not big dramatic items, little things. A pocket knife I lost off the dock as a kid showing up in a box I swear I never packed. A hat from a boat I crewed on in my 20s, turning up in a thrift store 3 towns away. Letters I threw out years ago reappearing at the bottom of drawers. Each time, there's a moment where I hold the object and feel that cold, deep sense of having been seen, of a ledger being updated. I don't throw things away anymore. Not because I'm sentimental, because I'm scared where they'll go when they leave my hands and what it will mean if they come back. I keep broken gear, dead phones, old boots, pile them up in the garage like I can jam the cycle on my end and keep it from turning over on the other. The ocean doesn't need my permission to keep its accounts. I know that. But some nights, when the wind is just right, I swear I can smell salt all the way out here. I'll wake up with the taste of it on my tongue and the image in my head of my little boat sitting on a pedestal of preserved bodies and fish and lost objects, balanced on the tip of some long column of history going down farther than anyone's sounder can read. And in that moment, I understand something I wish I didn't. We're not the only ones keeping track of what we take and what we lose. The ocean keeps its own books. One day, for reasons we'll never be ready for, it might decide to show you the pages with your name on them.